I never wanted a stick-thin, nosy dork in his glasses to be the harbinger of doom in my life. But there I was, listening to Keith hand over the security protocols with the same enthusiasm one might reserve for explaining paint drying techniques. It was my first night on the job at the old Wonderville amusement park, now a sprawling tomb of rusting rides and sun-faded mascots. Closed down after a series of accidents that spooked the locals and killed the business, it remained monitored for insurance purposes, and whatever legal ghosts still haunted the place. "You ready, man? It's pretty straightforward, just gotta keep your eyes open and nothing more," Keith said, pushing his glasses up his nose, his flashlight beam dancing like a nervous ballerina as he handed me a set of crumpled rules printed on an old laminated sheet that had yellowed with age. "Mostly, it's boredom you'll be fighting. Oh, and raccoons. They love the funhouse." The guard shack was about as cozy as a dentist's waiting room, with the aroma of mothballs mixed with stale coffee that hung in the air like an uninvited guest. I settled in, scanning the rules Keith had given me. They were oddly specific and unnerving. 1. Always close the gates behind you. 2. Never enter the Hall of Mirrors after midnight. 3. If you hear music from the carousel, do not investigate. 4. Keep clear of the mascot storage room during your rounds. 5. Do not follow voices coming from beneath the ground. 6. Ignore the lights in the water park area. They malfunction. 7. Report immediately if you see any mannequins outside the House of Laughs. Ignore voices from beneath the ground. Who wrote these? Stephen King? I chuckled, trying to mask the crawl of apprehension up my spine. Keith only offered a non-committal grunt as he glanced at his watch, edgy to leave. "Just follow them, man. Makes life easier for everyone," he said, his voice dropping a notch, almost imperceptibly. The first few hours passed by uneventfully. I did my rounds, shining my torch into dark corners more out of obligation than necessity. The cool night breeze carried with it the musty smell of old popcorn and the faintest hint of salt water from the derelict water park. It felt like walking through someone else's nightmare, surreal and disquieting. At about midnight, just as my eyes were competing to see which could stay open longer, I heard it soft, melodic, hauntingly out of place. The sound of carousel music floated through the night, tinkling through the air like laughter. Breaking Rule 3 already. I stood still, listening, wondering if maybe the wind was playing tricks, manipulating the rusted mechanisms of the old rides. Curiosity creeping up my neck, I walked toward the sound. The carousel, pathetically vibrant under the moonlight, stood in the stark silence of the park. My flashlight's beam landed on the painted horses, their colors faded to ghosts of their former glory. They were still, silent, mocking my expectations. But something was off. They seemed positioned differently than when Keith and I had walked past during the daytime tour. A sound snapped me out of my inspection, a creak from the direction of the House of Laughs. The silhouette of a figure, perhaps a mannequin, stood where none had been before. I remembered Rule 7, heartbeat ratcheting up a notch. It wasn't just outside the house. It was moving, clunky, jerky. Wrong, like a video with too many frames missing. The figure stopped, and in the dim light, I could swear it turned, its face obscured but somehow still staring, knowing. I stepped back instinctively, every horror movie I'd ever scoffed at flashing through my mind. Then it moved, or did it? It was hard to tell, my light flickering, a sign of my trembling hands rather than the battery. I wanted to call out, to break the rule of silence that Keith had not mandated, but felt as real as the others, to demand an explanation for this glitch in reality. Instead, I turned and walked briskly back to the safety of the guard shack. When I glanced back, the figure was gone as if it had never been there at all. The carousel music had stopped. The quiet felt oppressive, like the park was holding its breath. Sitting down, I tried to steady my breathing. Something was seriously wrong in this amusement park, and the rules, so arbitrary at first, took on a new, sinister weight. As much as I wanted to write it all off as lack of sleep or an overactive imagination, intuition whispered that something graver was unfolding. Outside, the chill of the early morning made the trees shudder, their shadows like fingers scratching at the windows. As I stared into the dark, trying to unsee what I'd seen, a slow, deliberate tapping began against the glass. Tap, 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 distinct, calculated, and chillingly patient. I forced myself to stand still, to listen between the intermissions of my own quick breaths. That insistent tap, 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 each knock pushed a deeper wedge of terror into me. My mind teetered between dismissing it as a cruel trick of the wind and yielding to the heart-stopping idea that someone, or something, was deliberately singling me out through the vast chill of the dark. My hands groped blindly for a light switch, but in a tremor of doubt, what if more visibility only revealed more horrors? I stilled. My fingers hovered, trembling, just inches from the switch, while my eyes remained fixed on the window, where my parted curtains cast a thin veil over the outside darkness. My sight darted about, praying to find nothing amiss that could match the sinister taps. But then my gaze caught it, a faint smear, a discoloration on the glass that hadn't been there the night before. My stomach churned. It looked unnaturally organic, like a ghostly handprint muddying the otherwise pristine window. The tapping paused. A hopeful part of me surged with relief had it given up. Yet a deeper, primal part of me screamed that this was just the quiet before the storm. The silence was even worse than the noise. In silence, my imagination cartwheeled, conjuring up fiendish figures lurking just beyond the glass, their breath fogging up the space between us. Minutes, or was it hours, crawled by. I was afraid to move, to breathe too loudly, as if any slight would invite whatever was out there directly into the room. Just when I thought I might burst from the tension, a new sound shattered the silence, a low shuffling like dry leaves dragged across a sidewalk. My heart raced. The sound wasn't tapping. It was something moving, shifting with a deliberate slowness that seemed almost thoughtful, intentionally terrifying. I should have called for help. I should have screamed or run, but my body betrayed me, locked in a sickening fascination with what might appear at the window. The curtains swayed slightly, whether from my trembling breath or an outside force, I couldn't tell. They parted further, a sliver of night piercing the feeble sanctuary of my home. There it was, a shadow, dense and distended, lingered just beyond the glass. It shifted languidly, pulsing in rhythm with my pounding heart. It was as though it was breathing, waiting, sizing me up. The sight unleashed a paralysis in me, my muscles tensed for a hellish eternity. Why wasn't I moving? Tap, tap, tap. The noise returned, not from the window now, but from the wood of the door leading to the hallway. My breath hitched. The tapping hadn't come from outside at all, or had it moved? The house's old bones seemed to moan in agreement with my fears, the walls whispering secrets in creaks and groans. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. Moving inch by tortuous inch, I edged away from the window toward the hallway. Perhaps I could reach my phone in the kitchen. Perhaps this was just a nightmare seeping into reality, a bad dream that a splash of cold water might dispel. As I crept with painstaking slowness, the floorboard beneath my foot groaned loudly, a traitorous sound in the silent terror that enveloped the house. The tapping abruptly stopped, and a grotesque peace fell. My mind screamed to break the quiet, to do anything to make it feel normal again. The last vestiges of my denial shattered when I reached the kitchen, and my questing fingers, shivering with dread, brushed across the cold, unforgiving surface of the countertop. No phone. I had left it charging by my bed, right next to the window, next to where the tapping had started. A simple, chilling thought trickled through my panic-stricken mind. It had wanted me there. It had herded me like a beast to the slaughter. With a dismal desperation, I turned back, the weight of 1,000 icy stairs pressing against my spine as I faced the darkness of the hallway creeping toward my bedroom once more. As I trudged down the hallway, the old hardwood groaned ominously underfoot with a malice that seemed born from the very walls themselves. Each step I took was a battle against the suffocating darkness that filled the stretch before me. It festered like a living thing, pulsating with a subtle menace that threatened to overwhelm me. Perhaps the whispered warnings from my grandmother had more truth than I'd feared. The house, she had insisted in those hushed tales by the fire, wasn't just old, it was haunted. Misery clings to the woodwork, she used to say, eyes widening with the type of authentic terror that only soured with the years. I recalled her words, a cold comfort against the growing chill seeping through my pajamas. As I neared the bedroom, the air grew perceptibly colder. The thin slice of light from my partly open door did nothing to lessen the dread that clawed at my chest. A familiar scent teased my senses, musty, like the old books in the attic, mixed with something faintly metallic. Iron, perhaps, or blood. The very thought caused a shiver to travel sharply down my spine. The door creaked eerily as I pushed it further open, the sound abnormally loud in the surrounding. Stillness. My eyes scanned the room, catching on the usual, the old oak dresser, the ragged armchair by the window, and then my heart stuttered. The mirror. Positioned just across my bed, it now reflected a distortion, a shadow within its depths that chilled me to the bone. It was me, but not quite. The reflection bore an unsettling grin, and its eyes, was it possible they gleamed with malice? I froze, breath hitching. Logic screamed at me to run, to deny what I was seeing, but my feet might as well have been embedded in the ancient floorboards. "It's just a trick of the light," I whispered to myself, the words barely a breath. Yet even as I spoke, the reflected figure cocked its head, mimicking me in a grotesque pantomime. This couldn't be happening. The room felt constricted, the walls inching closer, powered by my escalating fear. I blinked hard, praying for normalcy when my eyes next opened. The image persisted, only now a slow, syrupy blackness began to ooze from the corners of the mirror, tendrils creeping outward. A distant, rational part of my brain recognized that this was the point of decision, confront or flee. Yet, I was already stepping towards the mirror, drawn by a compulsion beyond my understanding. Each step felt heavier, my body increasingly reluctant. The air grew denser, fraught with unspoken warnings. As I drew closer, the figure in the mirror stretched out a hand, palm up, inviting. No, not inviting, beckoning. The room around me dimmed, attention funneling towards that outstretched limb. A part of me was screaming, railing against the sheer wrongness of it all, but it was like watching through a fogged glass as my hand reached out in response to mirror my dark counterpart. Our fingers were inches apart when a sharp jolt, the ancient house settling, a fact I'd normally ignore, snapped me back to reality. Heart pounding, I retracted my hand as if scorched. The figure in the mirror, however, didn't mimic this. Instead, it maintained its outstretched, hanging gesture, and its grin widened further, dissecting its face into a grotesque mask. Backing away, I bumped into the cold wall, the plaster harsh against my skin. My breath emerged in frantic gasps, misting in the icy air as if the room itself had suddenly dropped to freezing. The darkness seemed to congeal around me, wrapping its tendrils tighter, whispering in frequencies that teased the edge of hearing. I had to get out. Turning on my heel, I fled. The hallway, once merely oppressive, now felt like a gauntlet. Behind me, the slow drag of something soft and wet echoed off the walls, a visceral reminder of the nightmare behind. Yet, I didn't dare look back. I burst into the safety of the living room, slamming the door shut with a force that made the house shudder. Leaning against it, I slid to the ground, my entire body trembling as I tried to catch my breath. The living room, bathed in the dim nightlight from the street outside, seemed a sanctuary compared to the hell of the back corridor. But as my breathing slowed, a new sound prickled at my awareness, a soft, deliberate scratching, like fingernails, emanating from the other side of the door. My sanctuary, it seemed, was just another cage, and whatever was with me in the house wasn't confined to reflections. The nights began to stretch longer, their darkness deeper and more clinging than before. I'd find myself pacing by the hour, each step reverberating quietly against the old wooden floors, whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. It wasn't just the reflections anymore. The shadows themselves seemed to pulse with a life of their own. An inkling of movement always just at the periphery of my vision, a flit, a mere suggestion that when I turned, vanished as if it had been merely a trick of the light. Despite the escalating dread that nested like a crow in the pit of my stomach, a morbid part of me intruded, poking and prodding at my fear, urging me to seek out whatever shared my space. Several times I found myself standing before the large hallway mirror at the stroke of midnight, watching. The reflection showed more than my anxious, sleep-deprived eyes and the disheveled mess of my hair. There was a flicker, a shade darker than the surrounding shadows, that seemed almost human in shape but distorted, as if viewing the world through water. One evening, as the wind howled like the chorus of the damned against the windows, the power flickered and died, plunging me into an obsidian abyss. The abruptness of the blackout left me momentarily disoriented, and as my eyes adjusted, there was a palpable shift in the air, a cold draft that hadn't been there a second ago. The silence that enveloped the room was oppressive, weighty, and then, from the direction of the mirror, a soft, dragging sound, like fabric over wood. I held my breath, my heart pounding an erratic tattoo against my ribcage. The sound grew closer, more pronounced, as though whatever cow. It had gained confidence with each silent second that I failed to react. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, the sudden bloom of light from the screen making me squint. The flashlight pierced the darkness, casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. As the light swept across the mirror, the reflection trembled, blurred by a momentary mist, or so I hoped. Gathering every shred of courage, I stalked toward the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, eyes wide, phone clutched like a lifeline. But something was off the room behind me in the reflection. It was my living room, but not as I had left it. The furniture was askew, books and knickknacks strewn about as if after a struggle. I spun around, heart in my throat, only to find my actual living room untouched, everything in its proper place. I turned back to the mirror, a scream locked behind my teeth as the reflection showed the room once again normal. The discrepancy, brief as it was, had been clear. I was not alone. A feeling of being watched crawled up my spine, an icy finger tracing the vertebrae. In the reflected room, amidst the disorder, a dark silhouette slowly materialized, details of its form murky and indistinct, yet unmistakably watching me. Backing away, I kept my eyes on the mirror. The silhouette began to move, its motions jerky, unnatural, as if it hadn't learned how to maneuver the physical form it had taken. When I reached the threshold of the room, the figure abruptly stopped, its head tilting in a curiously dog-like gesture, as if puzzled by my fear. That night, without power, the cold seeped into the bones of the house, settling into every corner. I bundled in blankets, every little sound of the house settling magnified into a sinister whisper. As dawn finally broke, pale and unassuming, my relief was palpable, yet short-lived. With the light came a visible change. The air in the house felt thicker, charged with an unspoken warning. My reflection, once confined to the mirror, started to seep into every shiny surface. The TV screen, windows, even the surface of my coffee, each more distorted than the last. Each version of myself moved slightly out of sync, no longer mimicking my actions, but seeming to mock them. The realization hit me then with the weight of the coming night. These reflections weren't just images. They were glimpses into a reality that overlapped my own, a reality where something had noticed me, where it learned from me. And tonight, as the shadows grow bold and the wind whispers again, I understand that my sanctuary is lost to me, replaced by a playing field for whatever watches, whatever waits. I no longer question if my mind is playing tricks on me. The truth is far more terrifying. Because what reflects is no longer just a reflection, but an echo of a nightmare growing bolder, finding its way through the looking glass.